I was sitting here working the other day and I suddenly realized I've been using an M4 Pro Mac Mini now for just over a year and we haven't spoken about it in ages. Now, don't get me wrong, it's a great Mac and I do love it. But if I had my time again, I probably wouldn't buy it. And I think maybe, just maybe, I made a mistake. I'm David and this is D talking Mac Minis. Much like last week when I sat here and spoke to you about the iPhone Air, I'm not going to fill this short video full of meaningless B-roll and flashy graphics. This is just an intelligent conversation for me to open up a conversation with you. You know what ports are on the Mac Mini. You know what it looks like. It's more important that I let you know what it's been like to use day after day, heavily for a year, and also hopefully pass on some information and some advice that might help you buy the right Mac Mini and the right Mac in general. I can't even show you the Mac Mini right now because it's sitting there recording the audio for this session. So the Mac is at work. It's doing what it's supposed to be doing. Now, annoyingly, I did break my own rules when I bought my M4 Pro Mac Mini. There are some bargains to be had from Apple, but what you must remember is to not begin ticking too many of those option boxes. The minute you start upticking, that is when you lose those core bargains that are there. Now, for instance, let me talk about the MacBook Air briefly. If you go and spend £999 on that base model, you get 16 gigs of memory, 256 gigs of storage, a brilliant display and keyboard and trackpad. It is a bargain. And that MacBook Air, because it's Apple Silicon powered, will run and run and run and get most of your work done. I still take my M3 MacBook Air out with me sometimes when I'm traveling, and that gets everything done pretty much that I need. Apple Silicon Macs just changed the rules. But then on that same MacBook Air, if you were to tick all of the boxes and get 32 gigs of memory and 2 terabytes of storage, then you're up to £2,200. And that's not what a MacBook Air should be. That you shouldn't be spending that much money on a MacBook Air. Then you're getting into MacBook Pro territory, and we'll come back to that a little bit later on. So in my defense, I think there was 2 reasons I possibly made a mistake when I bought my M4 Pro Mac Mini. First of all, I run this channel, so it's important that I buy relevant gear that I think you might be interested in, that you might want to hear my initial thoughts on. And that's why I did buy 2. I did buy a base model. Possibly I should have kept that. And I also bought this very specced out M4 Pro Mac Mini, which is what I've been spending pretty much 50% of my day on for the last year. What did I get on it? Well, pretty much everything. First of all, it is the M4 Pro chip, the upgraded Pro chip, 14-core CPU and a 20-core GPU, 48 gigs of memory, 1 terabyte of SSD storage, and I even spent the extra £100, why not, on the 10 gig Ethernet port as well. So I spent £2,200 on this M4 Pro Mac Mini, and that's probably too much money. But the other element that comes to my defense is that the M4 Mac Studio wasn't out when I bought this. And it was a fantastic device. The M4 Mac Minis are brilliant Macs as long as you stick to that advice I said and don't try to make them into something that they're not. So that £2,200 is getting very close now to M4 Mac Studios territory. And that's why I think I probably made a mistake. If I was to look at that M4 Mac Studio, it has a 14-core CPU, a 32-core GPU, comes with 36 gigs of memory base, 1 terabyte of storage, and that's £2,300. So just £100 more than the M4 Pro Mac Mini sitting on my desk. And it's just a stronger, better, probably geared more to a professional and graphic working professional like myself. And it's not just those specs. There's other specs. For instance, the M4 Mac Studio has 410 gigs of memory bandwidth. My M4 Pro Mac Mini only has 273 gigs of memory bandwidth. And that memory bandwidth would be a useful part of my working week. It would help improve things. So I did overspend. What's it been like to use? It's been really, really good. And I have, from that point of view, 0 regrets. Now, obviously, I can only talk to you about how I use my Mac, which is for a lot of photo editing in Lightroom and obviously a lot of video work. And this is the important thing to try and look at your workflow. I bought this a year ago, and in that time, my workflow has intensified. A year ago, I barely ever shot a video away from this studio using this camera, which gives me .mov files. Throwing those into Final Cut on this M4 Pro Mac Mini, never ever did it have an issue. It worked smoothly every single time. No matter how many layers I had, it was fine. But now, you may have seen recently, I've been pushing the boundaries, I've been traveling a lot, and I've been shooting on my iPhone 17 Pro Max. And I've been shooting in really high codecs, Apple ProRes RAW, Apple ProRes 422HQ, H.265, really heavy codecs. Now, a single stream of those codecs behaves fine in Final Cut on this Mac Mini. The minute I start to layer them up, that's when I've noticed some issues. A couple of times, it's been bad enough that I've had to quit Final Cut. I don't think it's a Final Cut issue. It's a Mac issue because I notice it as I'm layering up those high codec layers. And also, I use Motion VFX plugins, and they've released some brilliant plugins in this past year, but they're very intensive. There's 3D, there's motion tracking, and once I'm beginning to throw those onto timeline, then I really notice it stutter. So that's about as intense as I push my M4 Pro Mac Mini, and that's when, in these past couple of months, since I've been traveling more and shooting in those higher codecs, I've noticed that it struggled, and that's what made me think possibly I should be thinking about an M4 Max Studio at this point. But I would still recommend the Mac Mini to many, many people, the vast majority of people. I know not everybody sits here working in video and high codecs like I do. That's quite a niche area. I'm only giving you my feedback so that you've got some context if you're thinking of buying a Mac Mini, what you should be buying. And I would say, go for that base level M4 Mac Mini. Don't go for the Pro, go for that base £599 model. Maybe upgrade to 24 gigs of memory, because the one thing that I've learned with Apple Silicon is it likes memory. Once you've got some headroom for the memory, spend your money on memory. You don't need to spend it on storage because, of course, there are now other options. Every Mac out there, by the way, if you were to spend that money, £599, with the upgraded 24 gigs of memory, you're only talking about £800. And that, assuming that you've got a decent monitor, mouse, keyboard, that is a Mac that's going to last you for years and years and years to come, and it will really behave so well for you. It's a brilliant Mac at that price point. That is a bargain. But as I was about to say, every Mac has a reason in Apple's lineup. There were a couple of exceptions to that. The iMac, for instance, I think kind of breaks the rules because it's Apple's only desktop all-in-one Mac. Even if you were to spec all of the specs you could on there and go with nano texture, 32 gigs of memory and 2 terabytes of storage, you're still only spending £2,900 because of the quality of the iMac, assuming that you're happy with a 24-inch display. It's a brilliant Mac. I've got one. I don't use it enough, but it is a brilliant Mac. So I think that kind of breaks the rules. The same is true of the MacBook Pro as well, because that's not just a laptop. It is a laptop that's very much designed for and generally will be used in a desktop situation as well. So there, again, ticking boxes on a MacBook Pro, I think that's fine because it's going to last you for a very long time. And it is designed to be used kind of in a hybrid working situation. But if you look at the MacBook Air, and particularly look at the Mac Minis, that's where you need to stick to those base machines. Those base machines are what they were designed to be. That's what you should be using them for. Now, I said that I spend about 50% of my time working during the week on my M4 Pro Mac Mini. That's because the other 50% of the time, I'm at home and I work on an M1 Max MacBook Pro. And to give you some idea, that handles all of the codecs that I can throw at it, all of those motion graphics, without missing a beat. It's 4 years old now. It's worked hard virtually every single day of its life. I even took it to Edinburgh with me last week because I knew I was shooting in high codecs and I wanted to begin to assemble the timeline while I was away. It's a beast. Apple Silicon, as I said earlier on, changed absolutely everything. So don't be afraid even of looking for an older M1 Max MacBook Pro or an older Apple Silicon Mac. They, assuming they've been well looked after, represent great value for money. But the Mac Mini, I still love. Every day that I open the door and come and sit in the studio, it sits there looking cute, pretty and small. I've got a lovely desk setup because of it, super clean, and it really hardly ever complains. And as I say, the things it complains over are where I'm pushing it in a very niche area. So my takeaway from this is the Mac Mini is a brilliant machine, but don't be putting the Pro chip in it. Buy that base one, maybe a bit more memory in there, £800 tops, and you have bagged yourself a bargain. Walk away knowing you've got one over on Apple. But I'd be really interested to know, have you bought an M4 Pro Mac Mini? Have you found it? Have my stories related to how you found it over this last year or so? And are you hovering on the buy button? Has this video helped you at all? Just listen to the advice. Be cautious about not putting too many options on there and be honest about what your intentions of it are and what your workflow is now and what it's likely to be. The fact that my workflow is intensified shows you that it could happen to you too. But I'll be really interested to start this conversation off like we did last week with the iPhone Air. I want to know your stories about the M4 Pro Mac Mini or the M4 Mac Minis. I want to hear your stories of how you found it using it over this last year. I hope you enjoyed this sit-down, random conversation. But again, it's just because I'm sitting here using these things And I love using them. And I just want to have this conversation with you away from algorithms, away from sponsors, just me and you having a chat. Let me know what your M4 Pro or M4 Mac Mini stories have been. And I'll catch you on the next video.